So as we normally do, I'm very keen to just get an introduction from each of you, but on top of the introduction and a little bit of your story, I'm always curious for people to understand, why you're here, willing to help and add a bit of value back to a community of finance leaders who are conscious of change, leadership, and this whole topic. So love to hear a bit about that. So Colin, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks. Welcome everybody. Yeah, so Sean's already touched on a bit of my background. So I started, as a lot of you would have probably, as an accountant with one of the big four accounting firms. Realised after about 18 months that I needed to get into a commercial area instead. Joined Inchcape, which is a parent company that is mostly based in the automotive industry. And then have been there 23 years, have had 17 jobs in 23 years across 7 different businesses, and Simon, who's here, is actually now doing one of the roles I did a few years ago, so it's funny who you run into. And then I most of my first 10 years was in finance, different roles across distribution, logistics, retail, and also corporate, and then moved into things like business mergers, acquisitions, strategy, project management. So that's probably one of my best jobs, was sitting in a hard hat, high-vis vest and steel cap boots for a couple of years, building parts warehouses and offices and vehicle compounds around the country for the business. And then joined Subaru and did another rotation in there through finance to start, then through after sales, running the after sales business, sales, and then they let me loose in sales and marketing for a while, which is pretty interesting, and then MD for the last sort of 2.5 years. So it's sort of one business group, but effectively it feels like I've worked in lots of different companies over the years, because everyone has their own culture and their own dynamics. So that's a bit about me. I think in terms of the reason why I'm here is, from an automotive industry, but in general, I mean, change is everywhere at the moment, and it has been for a number of years. But for us in auto, it's probably only been the last 2 or 3 years that we've really started to see the change that a lot of other industries have been through. And it's not just product, with electric vehicles, hybrids, then autonomous vehicles down the track, which will completely change the industry. It's also the customer experience, but the way they access product. So mobility solutions, subscriptions, car sharing, etc. So there's massive amounts of opportunity, but also massive amounts of threats to the traditional auto space. And then there's a huge amount of regulation and regulatory focus as well. We seem to be the next cab off the rank after the banks, and for the last 2 or 3 years there's been a massive amount of focus on us. So change in our industry has been slow to come, but is probably hitting with full force, and will do for the next 4 or 5 years. But for me, the finance role, and having been one for a long time, I think there's a huge opportunity for finance professionals through change. So, people who talk about change management, or people who talk about change going forward, to me, if you can't deal with change as an absolute minimum requirement, you're going to struggle in the future in any role. But the opportunity for finance professionals, I think, is if you can thrive in change, and you can lead and drive the opportunities that it presents, you're going to take leaps ahead of other people in the same sort of position. And I think, and the reason why that is because there's probably only a couple of roles in a business that actually look across the whole business, and one's the MD and one's the finance role. Everybody else works in their silos or works in their own departments, and you can do as much as you like to bring everybody across the whole business. But the finance person is the one who actually sees every single part of the business. They're the one who puts all the pieces of the puzzle together. And it's not just enough, I think, to support change, but I think actually there's roles for people in this room and in the finance profession to actually drive the change. And in our business, I'll talk about it later, there's a massive amount of change, and our finance head is one of the key people who's actually not just supporting that, but driving that for us through the organisation. So,
Hi everyone, I'm John. So thanks for having me here tonight, guys. Great to be here and share a few stories and some insights, hopefully. My background is at James Hardie now, where I've been for a couple of years as the CFO of Asia Pacific, which includes Philippines, Australia and New Zealand. I started my career many years ago, similarly at KPMG, where I was there as a cadet, worked in various different parts of KPMG over the years. I was there for about 10 years. Started in Australia, went to Paris, I worked in France for a while, and then went to California and worked there in Silicon Valley for a while. Then I realised I didn't want to be a partner and stay at KPMG for the rest of my life, because again, I wanted to do something much more commercial. Then moved to the UK, got my first sort of FD role, where I was FD of a FTSE 250 divisional role of a business there. Got made redundant for the first time in my life, so that was a pretty serious gut check there. Yeah, that's changed for you, that's right. And then my next role was divisional FD of Hanson Building Products. So that was, if we talk about timing, I joined like about 2 or 3 months before the GFC hit. And to give you an idea, my division at that point, it was big. Our budget was £500 million turnover in the first year, and I had 4,000 people. So as your first sort of big FD role as I think it was 28 or something, it was like Harvard business case study type review. So we ended up, unfortunately, laying off 40% of the workforce. We had 27 plants all around the UK. We closed about 9 of them. We lost MDs. We lost all sorts of people through that process. So that really put a lot of hair on my chest in a pretty short period of time. Then I stayed at Hanson for a number of years and then moved back to Australia once we had a family. Worked for CSR for a little while. And then after that, I thought, okay, if I want to do a big CFO role one day, whenever that might be, I need to get different experience and skill sets other than being a divisional CFO or FD. So I actually changed industries and went in financial services, where I worked for a fund of hedge funds through one of my networks. It was a small fund, so you had a lot of hands-on experience doing IR, doing tax, doing heavy-duty accounting, really involved in the front-end commercial side of the business. So that was great, even doing COSEC sort of stuff, which, again, you don't typically get the experience in a divisional role. So that was really good experience. We worked investment banking hours, which almost killed me for a while, but did that, then moved to another fund after that in infrastructure, which is where we all know is huge investment and opportunity. Did that for a little while and then got headhunted out of there into James Hardie, and that's where I'm now. But look, probably one of the reasons I'm here tonight is these sorts of forums, to my experience at least, weren't really, either they existed or they just weren't frequently made available to people 5 or 10 years ago. I think it's fantastic what the guys have put on. Hopefully we can share 1 or 2 things tonight that you guys take away with you and just ponder. But as we've already said, change is here whether we like it or not. The pace of change doesn't appear to be slowing in sort of any industry that I get exposure to or groups of finance professionals that I deal with. It's just how you adapt to it and how you add value in those situations. So anyway, I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
That's good. So, ditto. I suppose, as far as intro, I've known Sean for 30 years, probably. So I actually went to school with Sean in primary school, so there you go. I've known Colin here for probably 20 years as well. So I actually worked at Intercape too. So, hello all. So it just shows you should never sort of burn your bridges in the city market, because you never know when it sort of comes back to burn you as well. So, look, my background, circa 20 years in finance roles, again also in chartered firms for a period of time, through Intercape, Goodman Fielder, and more recently in Qantas. So 15 years in Qantas. I've had 14 roles in Qantas. So not 14 roles, so 10 roles in Qantas in 15 years. And Qantas has been through phenomenal change in the last 15 years. So that story goes without saying. Most notably familiar with things like, I was involved in the international business for a while. I was the head of finance international, so heavily involved in sort of looking at that business and that turnaround strategy there, and in particular some of the alliance strategies. So I worked heavily on the Emirates transactions and working out how we as a business can grow globally through the use of partnerships, and that was really a key pillar in the business. More recently, in the loyalty business, and as Sean said, a great story. A business that actually has shown an amazing way to sort of innovate and continue to innovate and re-innovate and derive a whole new business propositions through just leveraging data and leveraging customer contacts and customer insights, and with that comes a whole piece around cultural change and behaviours and leadership structures and how you drive cutting edge workforces. So that's an amazing experience for me. And then it's more into the recent role around finance and group, which has a far larger labour force. So I played a really important role in not just informing people, but inspiring people, and inspiring people to actually drive change. And that's my important role, my current role, and I take that quite seriously. So I'm here for that reason. So I actually take leadership and leadership change really seriously. And I'll share a small story with you if I can, and about my leadership journey. Because we at Qantas do a lot of work around leadership and around having leadership journeys and looking at leadership shadows and our leadership journeys. And we do various forums, and I often use this story quite often. So I'm a firm believer that as you're going through your leadership journey, there's a point where you learn, and there's a point where you learn more about leadership, and there's a point you learn more about change, and it's through experience. And that's been my experience, is that you grow into it. And there was one part of my career where if you sort of picture a cloud as circus, and I think we've all been there. You're sitting there and you're the person who's spinning all the plates, and you feel as though you're the only person who's still spinning those plates and making sure those plates don't fall down, because you're the only person that's doing that. And it's a hard thing to do, but we've all done it. But eventually those plates fall down. But you can't always spin those plates. You can't always spin the plates and make sure. So eventually you work out that your role actually isn't about spinning all those plates. It's about actually empowering people to sort of spin those plates for you, and being in the right place at the right time to support them and show them leadership, and have real good change agents spinning those plates for you. And that for me, that came through, through some real important life lessons. I was one of those guys, and you're probably the same, who had very little work-life balance. I probably had the largest annual leave, accrual in the company at a period of time. But that wasn't going to work. So, changing your work practices, growing your leadership, your leadership style and your leadership, mandates, and change the way you work. And that's an important part towards being on the journey towards learning more skills around change. So that's an important part of my journey.
I think you make a really interesting point there, Rob, and that's early stage of your career. What gets you to a certain point doesn't get you to the next phase. And I think a lot of us in this room are, at different points, at different inflection points from that in that journey. Building on, everyone talked a lot about different changes and different phases, but of course, as Rob pointed out, there's stages where there's clearly going to be structural, cultural, strategic shifts in a business. So in terms of creating clarity and building a vision or goal or plan or whatever words you want to use to describe it, I'm keen for you to all take me through how you bring others to align on that, and sort of tactical steps or process that you go through to make that happen. So if you can take us through that, would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that the first point, and Rob touched on it as well, is you learn by making a lot of mistakes. And I think change is an area where it does come with practice, and you'll be a bull at a gate and come up with these brilliant ideas, or that's what you think in a way, and then you start to implement them and you realise that the idea might have been good but the traction's terrible. So we're actually, and I spoke to you guys earlier, so we're probably about 3 months into rolling out our new 5-year strategy for the brand and for the business. So it's perfect timing, which was why this was such an important topic, I think. And so through the process, we probably started work on this about 12 months ago. But we spent probably just as much time on how we were going to get buy-in into the business and how we were actually going to get traction into the business than we did developing the strategy in the first place. And I'll talk maybe a little bit about it on some of the other questions, but we actually brought psychologists into our organisation as clinical psychologists. As a leadership team, we spent a number of months working individually and as a team with psychologists first around our own triggers and our own motivators. And I think one of the first things I'd say is, the more you can understand the individual motivators and individual triggers of someone, and spend the time up front doing that, the better chance you've got of success, because your messaging, the way you structure things, the support framework you put around people is all based on how they react individually. So that's probably the first key thing, is putting the time up front for that. For us, through our journey, I think the other key thing was being incredibly clear and simple on the message. So, I've seen some absolutely wonderful visions and purposes that are a paragraph long, and it's never going to work in my experience. So if it's more than about 5 or 6 words, if it's more maximum than a single sentence, I think you're going to start losing people. So simplicity, clarity, to me, are the things that we've learned through the process. But then the next big one from that is actually setting the building blocks up. So as an example for us, I said we've set our new purpose and vision for the brand. Then what we've done to start to bring it down to reality, because purpose and vision should always be emotional. It should create an emotional connection, because that's why people want to work for you, or that's why people want to work for the brand. So the emotional piece is great, but ultimately if you can't translate it into reality, and if you can't translate it into someone's day-to-day job, so every day they come to work, they do X. If they don't understand how they play a role in that, then that's where you're going to lose them at different stages of the process. So we created 6 must-win battles off that, very clear, targeted must-win battles. Again, they were half a sentence each, and they set out exactly in clear language that anybody could understand what we were going to achieve. And if we achieve those things, then we would deliver on the purpose. The next 2 steps then were obviously you've got a series of activities that have to sit below that. So nothing happens in our business now unless it's one of those activities that's been defined. Simple as that. Because we'll go back and we'll challenge and we'll push and we may change them, but ultimately for now, if it's not on that list, we don't do it. Then the last part, which is probably the most important one for me, and which is where most people miss out, and certainly on one we did a few years ago, that's where we stuffed up, was everybody's got a performance agreement or a performance management process that you have with your staff. Those individual objectives that you set must be those activities. Because at any stage of the process, if you've got a breakdown between them, then you're going to have a breakdown in people's focus and people's understanding. So actually having their objectives, each one of our people has 5 objectives. Every one of those 5 objectives is a key activity. And that then ladders up. So every single person knows exactly what they're doing and how it ladders up to the organisation. So that's kind of the process we went through.
That's great. So if I think of one of my head of finance roles in particular, I guess I stepped into an environment where the previous CFO had been in that role for 10 years. So the organisation, or the function at least for finance and IT, hadn't gone through significant change up until that point in time, and that was one of the mandates for me coming in. The way that I handled it was, coming into the organisation, I sort of recognised if I tried to go at breakneck speed on day one, I was just going to break everybody, and clearly that was not what I wanted to do. But I took my time in doing an assessment of the key contributors and the people really adding value and who were open to wanting to be on the bus of change. So I took my time a little bit up front just to get a pulse of where was the function and were they ready for change and what sort of change that I thought they were ready for. Once I did that, I got my direct report. Well, I did a bit of reorganisation. I think I had 15 direct reports at first, and I just said I'm not that good. So I reduced that. I changed reporting lines. I got it to a much more manageable situation. I was constantly saying to my staff, look, I'm just one guy. I'm pretty good at allocating resource, and I'm pretty good at calling where the risks and opportunities are within the business, but I'm just a guy like you. So I'm good at certain things, but I can't do... Well, I've got 70, not 280 or however many you have, but I can't do 70 people's job. But if I can help optimise you guys by 5% each, well, then that's something significant that will really move the dial. So anyway, once I got to that point, got my new sort of team around me, and then said, guys, my style is more collaborative. So I said, look, let's get together, let's create a vision, which we did. And that makes it much easier once everybody's then bought in to then feed that through the organisation. So again, it's not just one person who's standing up by a lectern just spitting something out. You've got people who are really behind the vision and then the objectives that feed through underneath that. So once we were clear on the vision and people understood the why they turn up to work every day, we then started to set our one-page plans for the year, which sort of folded down from the group strategy. And then after that, we lined up the individual strategies behind the goals and then the key activities. So it's sort of nicely layered down within the organisation, and then the KPIs that feed into that. But I guess I was conscious of not going too hard too early in some of those other areas without people understanding in a relatively lean environment, well, why am I here? Because it's not really until the rubber hits the road in really tight periods where you're asking people to go above and beyond. If they don't know why they're turning up to work, then you're going to have high turnover and high attrition, which can happen in a lot of change management processes. So that's.
We often debate, the go hard or the drawn out process, and we it sort of oscillates between the two based on the circumstance. But my most recent example was that I was part of a management team who went agile. So literally took 740 people who operated in a hierarchy structure, so marketing, finance, sales, commercial. And we thought, you know what? Is there a better way of doing this? Can we go agile and create scrums? So we went from hierarchies to 35 scrums. So a scrum is, a scrum has 1 in 10 of trying to deal with a customer pain point or trying to deal with a way of trying to get commercial value out of the business. And that's their sole focus. And that scrum has a scrum leader, has a marketing person, has a finance person, has a commercial person, and it sort of changes the way of doing things. It means that these guys no more live in their nice environment of finance or marketing. They're actually now leaving the scrum, and they're sort of been sort of let loose to sort of reign the corridors and do their own thing. But it's really complex because what we hope you're getting people close to the customer and close to the business. You can quite easily lose control very quickly. So it's a really amazing experience as far as doing that. So I think the key comments you guys made is probably similar to me. So what sort of made it succeed? Without doubt, open and transparent communication around the why, the when, the how, and the regularity around that. I think the fortunate thing we had is that we had a culture that supported that. So when you have this culture that supports that, you have a culture of really openness, transparency and trust. When you do the why, the when, the how with that culture, people actually do buy into it, and they believe you and they trust you, and they know that while you're still in grey zones, they're happy to come on the journey and be part of that. But it comes with a whole bunch of complexities. Like one of the complexities for us was that all of a sudden, the business analysts who report to a finance manager, who report to a head of finance, who report to a CFO, didn't exist anymore. And they're going, where's my career structure? My career's gone out the window. I have no line between here and my next role. So there's that ambiguity. And I think working with people and teams to sort of work through that was really, really quite critical. A really important point, so being really close to the team and actually understanding their concern areas. I think employing for those scrums, again, absolute clarity around those KPIs, because you're only really doing this to get commercial value, and having those KPIs really succinct, crystal clear, understood, and manageable. Having every person in the team understand their role in delivering that KPI, I think Colin, you referred to that as well. So that is absolutely critical and fundamental. And to understand that they can actually play a role in the change process and an important role in that process. So that's one example of taking organisation, throwing it in the air, looking at a different way of doing things and pushing change through and having to deal with those consequences as you go through.
There's plenty of gold there. I'm very glad to see lots of pens and notes being taken. So I enjoy hearing these things. It's sort of my sweet spot. So going to move the dial towards people that fall off the journey and what we learn about that. So I'm sure for all of you, you've had some key talent or people around you or peers that for one reason or another don't decide to come further. So I'm keen for you to explain sort of what you see in that and how that's actually, in terms of your awareness of why people fall off, how that helps you as a leader or has helped you as a leader.
I think one of the first things is the definition of talent or high potential, because I think you may have an incredibly talented person who's incredibly good at doing a certain thing. Where you're moving to or the sort of skill sets that you want moving forward, that person may not have. So I think one of the real challenges, and it's a really hard process to go through, is understanding your definition of talent now versus your definition of talent in the future. And I use a word at work a lot, which is ruthless, and it's got really negative connotations, but it shouldn't have. I think as a business and as leaders of businesses, you need to be incredibly ruthless about the decisions you're making, and understand exactly what you're trying to achieve, because a talented person in one day may be completely opposite. But in terms of the general thing of who you see as your future talent, we've obviously got an exec team, and then we've got a sort of a management group. We've also got another group that sits kind of separate to that, which we've called the brand drivers. It's about 5 or 6 people at any point in time. It rotates and moves around all the time. They're generally from the management group, but they don't have to be. But they are the incredibly talented people in that sphere, or whatever we're looking at that point in time. They're high potentials, but they're also incredibly motivated. And the reason they've been picked, though, is because not through hierarchy, they've been picked through influence. So these are the people in the business, and you've all got them, who are hugely influential in the organisation, but they may not have a title. Like, we've got some guys on there who've got one person reporting to them or no one reporting to them, but they're incredibly influential throughout the business. So we made sure we brought those people into the journey very early. They felt they were part of it. They felt they could have influence, and I think when you've got high potential people, they need to feel that they're making a change. So you've got to set up the structure to allow them to do that, and allow them to have that say. Give them the boundaries potentially, but allow them to go free in that area. I think then it comes back to the other ones around individual motivators, and I know I talk a lot about, anybody who knows me well, I talk a lot about psychology, probably because my wife's a psychologist, but the psychology of people and what's made them talented and made them high potential is incredibly important to understand, because then how you set them up and how you move more of those people to where you need to be is going to be far more successful if you really understand what drives them and what motivates them. I think all the usual things around simplification, clarity, and the structures you put in place are really important. Probably the only other one, which I'm sure a lot of you would have seen the video, it's in a lot of programs that you go through, is the concept of first follower.
I've seen it here too.
You have? Okay, so the lunatic that gets up and starts dancing all by himself at the music conference, the music festival, and then everyone's kind of staring at him for a while, and all of a sudden that next person gets up. The one thing I would suggest, and I've done it and we've had people in the business do it, it is in most cases far more powerful for the organisation when somebody else is leading it, somebody else has got that idea, and you as the leader is actually the first follower. So you don't always have to be the person out there running down the hill, or the first person leading the whole group. Sometimes it's far more powerful to sit behind and show that you're supporting that person, and the speed of momentum is drastically increased when that happens, from my experience at least.
So in my experience, and I don't know if I'm speaking for you guys or not here, as a CFO, you're really only as good as your team. If, I guess to my point earlier, if you don't have a high-performing team around you that then has enough high-performing people underneath them, you're not going to be able to do 70, 240 people's roles. That might sound simple, and I guess it is. So you really have two options in doing that, or I guess there's three, a combination of the two. The first is you either hire in talent, so I guess the recruiters amongst us will be happy to hear me say that, or you develop people, which in a way I think is harder. Certainly takes a lot more work and a lot more time and blood, sweat and tears, or you do a combination of both of those things. There's no one right sort of formula for those. In my experience, I've tended to identify fairly quickly who's, like I said before, on the bus and not on the bus. There seems to be a fair bit of self-selection when you start to raise the bar and ask people to jump through hoops and operate at different levels. And in fact, when you do bring new people into the organisation with fresh ideas, the people around them, again, they either lift because they're inspired or they see what the new kid on the block's doing in that sort of area, or they self-select and they move themselves out. But really, from a leadership perspective, one of the things that I've sort of learnt through my career, through a little bit of trial and error, is if you don't understand your people and if you don't connect with your people on a personal level, you can be the best CFO out there, but if you can't put your arm around people and they truly believe in you and what you stand for, then they're only ever going to do the absolute minimum that they think is required to get through the role or the job. It would just be a job to them. And ideally, at this sort of level, you're looking for people to go that extra mile for you when it counts, not all the time, because you'll just burn people out. But you've really got to have the pulse of what's happening within your organisation. For those high-performing people that, you know, sometimes do leave the organisation, for me, whilst it's always a difficult and sometimes I take it personally, personal situation, it has to be an opportunity where you learn from that and you really understand the why, so that you can really stop any potential bleed that might happen. Because, again, people aren't silly. When they see somebody who they know is a high performer walk out the door, it's often not just one. You see many people follow. They think, okay, well, if Johnny Jr. is good at what he does and he's leaving, well, then maybe some of those disgruntled feelings that I've had, I'm just going to follow and start looking as well. And let's face it, the good people out there will always have multiple options. They'll be snapped up pretty quickly. So my experience, you really have to get close enough to your people to understand, you know, when they're having a good day, when they're having a bad day, what drives them, what motivates them, as you said before. And just be approachable, because if you don't have an open door approachable policy, again, whether it's ourselves or our direct reports, then yeah, you're sort of operating on the wrong level, in my opinion.
Probably not dissimilar to Colin's experience. I think you know, not talented people aren't always don't always have the right soft skills to sort of deal with change, and that's an important part of the difference. I think. You know, we've coined a term called the 3 C's in our business for the finance community. It's probably not different to the 3 P's that you had in the 90s and in the early teens. And you know, it's courage, curiosity, and collaboration. And we still live by that as far as what it means, as far as driving people to you know, develop the soft skills to be able to deal with change, or deal with business partnering, or deal with a whole range of soft skill issues in the business. So it's all work for that. You know, for collaboration, when I sort of talk to set up those squads in our businesses, the ones who succeeded most in the change process were those who, you know, really took the whole process, you know, by the reins and collaborated, because collaboration is what it's all about, you know. And squads are geared up now for the idea that the more you collaborate with those groups, the better you are delivering, you know, solutions for your customer, or for driving further ways of commercial value. You know, courage. You know, those who show the courage to sort of lean in and explore and understand and you know, who are not have, you know, are not too shy to sort of do that, but they have, you know, have the willingness to sort of collaborate in the process, that they do really well, and the courage. You know, I think the courage to sort of ask the hard questions, or to be in awkward positions to sort of deal with change. I think they're really important things, and I think that's worked for us. And we even find now that interestingly, you know, we when we develop KPIs, that's a core competency. We sort of really elevate and celebrate those, demonstrate those 3 skills. But we know actually those guys are actually doing well as far as being future change agents, future leaders for our business. So it's a core competency in our finance community going forward. So
3 C's. I think a few people in this room might steal that. So we're conscious of time, so I'm going to get you to challenge you on this to rapid fire one tip to this answer. To this question, sorry. And the question that I want to pose is, when you consider greyness, right? So we talked last session about this whole idea of old world, new world, and that neutral zone. We've created a vision, we're going somewhere new, and we have to let go of what was working before and embrace something new. And of course, that creates a lot of ambiguity, a lot of greyness. And my question is, you know, what's the one tip that you would encourage as a leader to help people navigate in the grey?
Yeah, I think accept there's going to be greyness. Make it clear from the start that there will be. There'll be lots of areas that people don't know about, and then put the structure in place to help them. So a really strong support network, make very clear boundaries, and let them go wild within those boundaries. But accepting it up front and letting people understand that it's okay to be scared, it's okay to make mistakes, and have a structure there to help them out if that happens.
Mine's pretty short and sweet. I think have open communication channels. So again, people, you stand up and give a presentation about vision, and then you feed that through an organisation. People aren't going to get it first time. I mean, let's face it, it takes more than 5 minutes to come up with a vision yourself. So there's a lot of work and investment that goes into it. You need to be open to, our group CEO says you've got to tell people 9 times. So you've got to be able to have an open policy and an open environment where people can come back for the formal or informal Q&A so that they get it and they understand the why they're turning up to work.
I'll be even shorter. Look, I think those who grab the greyness and almost thrive in the greyness are those who end up building resilience. And I think resilience is the cornerstone of every good leader. If you build resilience, the world's your oyster, I think. And that's a bit corny, but ultimately, resilience is what drives really strong leaders and drives careers and drives people to do bigger and better things. And for all of us, I think we've all been there. It comes through being in grey zones. So the more you can demonstrate to people that don't hide from it, but encourage them to live through it. But to your point, give them some confidence and some support in the process. That's really key. So.
Thank you very much. Show of hands, as I normally ask, but some value in that. I would like to think that was, for me, a lot, but can I get a bit of feedback? Who thought that was really valuable? Yeah? This, and I didn't have to force him too hard then. If you didn't put your hand up, Colin's got you later. First of all, I just want to say a huge thank you. For me, I think within that, and this is the difficult part about change, there's so many elements of it that you shared in literally 40 minutes of conversation through the three of you. And I think for all of us, it's as much about taking what was presented there, but it's about identifying when is the time to play those cards and realise when you need to lean on some of those ideas that were shared there more than others, and playing what's in front of you. And I certainly think there was a lot there. The guys will be around tonight, and hopefully you can tap into their knowledge. But I would love a round of applause for our 3 guests here.